In this talk, we're going to go over the application of high-tech leading ideas to a relatively low-tech business, the Penny Ice Creamery in Santa Cruz, California. Kendra and Zach are our founders. They've known each other for around 12 years, and they periodically keep in touch on professional ideas. In 2008, they have an idea that ultimately turns into what we know as the Penny Ice Creamery, an artisanal ice cream business. Let's talk about how they came up with this idea, vetted it, and refined it. So Kendra has a culinary background. Zach has a business background. Kendra studied at the Culinary Institute Johnson in Wales. Zach has an MBA from Dominican University in California. Kendra spent time at Tartine, which is a wonderful bakery in the Mission District in San Francisco, and later at Manresa as a dessert chef, which is a restaurant in Los Gatos, California. Zach was at a couple of startups, and then he took a trip to Seattle to visit his sister-in-law who owned an artisanal ice cream business. And this is where Kendra and Zach started to converge on this idea of artisanal ice cream. In late 2008, they went to an organic dairy together. They picked some wild fennel on the way back, and they built their first prototype. This is when they first caught into the idea that there might be a real business here. Even though there are some things that they held as pretty permanent and stayed fast to about the business, the idea of the importance of the artisanal food movement and the organic food movement, they did not say, hey, we love this fennel ice cream, everybody else will love it too. They had a couple of friends that they sort of used to think about the typical buyer for these things, and they built their idea around these potential buyers, these customers, not just themselves. And in fact, later they developed these personas to help them think about and, more importantly, validate those ideas. So their first persona they created was the Epicurean. The Epicurean wants to stay on top of food trends. A user story, which we know has three parts, about an Epicurean is, as an Epicurean, I want to experience emerging food trends so that I can do more than just read about them. And the Epicurean is obviously an important early segment. The downtown patron. As a patron, I want to enjoy the occasional treat so that I have something extra to look forward to when I'm downtown Santa Cruz in this case. UCSC student, UC Santa Cruz. As a student, I want to have a local experience so I can commune with other students in our new town. This idea of forging a sense of community with the students who have all been, most of all have been transplanted from somewhere else was really important, and they adopted the Penny kind of adopted them. A lot of UCSC students work there. And finally, visitors. As a visitor, I want to find local favorites so that I can experience some local texture. Visitor is different in Kendra Zach's mind than a tourist, because a visitor is somebody who comes to Santa Cruz on a semi-regular or cyclical basis. They may have a home here, they may just vacation here, they may have friends here. Something brings them to Santa Cruz periodically. There's quite a lot of these people, and they're important as customers. So how do these different personas fit together in terms of acquiring customers? I think there's an idea, particularly in high tech, that if something's good, it'll go viral. But actually, this isn't always true. In fact, many of the most notable businesses like Facebook that are thought to be these viral successes were actually very closely choreographed. MySpace was, for instance, I don't think very well choreographed. It went out to the market. Hey, people can use this, and look what happened there. It was sort of went flat, and nothing happened to it. The classic idea about customer acquisition in high tech is this idea of the technology adoption life cycle, which was supplemented with this idea of a chasm by a man named Jeff Moore. The idea is you start with innovators and early adopters. These people are inclined to try out new things. They enjoy the novelty, or they have a really, really compelling need for what you have for one reason or another. But between them and the mainstream market, the early majority, there's this chasm, because the early majority, the mainstream buyer, is fundamentally more risk averse and more pragmatic about why they buy things than this early majority. So you may be headed, hey, every month percentage increases are great, and you hit this wall. Well, this is still applicable in high tech and in general in many cases, but a little bit less so, because this was more applicable when high tech was more about big purchase decisions with a long time horizon that required a big commitment, whereas a lot of things today are about a website or an app where your switching costs are not zero, but they're very low. A more flexible idea, heuristic, and one that's probably much more applicable to small businesses at large, is this idea of billiards. And I'm not a great pool player, but the first thing I learned about playing pool beyond just hitting the ball was you've got to look at where you leave the cue ball, the white ball that you hit. It's not just about making the shot that you're working on at the moment. It's about leaving the cue ball in a place where you're going to have another good shot, and so on and so forth. And that's a really good way of thinking about this stuff. The Penny, for instance, had the Epicureans as a early lead segment. These folks are influential towards UCSC students and downtown shoppers, the local market at large. And then visitors are going to generally want to look for things that the locals find interesting. They're going to look for the local favorites, so they're kind of one of the last shots. So things that Zach and Kendra realized about the business as they were going through these personas and these ideas of how they were going to build a community around their business were, it's not a mass market business. The in-store experience is really the most important thing, and it's an experiential product. The implications of that are they won't do resale, they want to have people in the store, and that they need to find artisanal staff that can go and they can explain the product the way that it ought to be explained to customers. They have themselves a passion for the product, and we'll talk about how Santa Cruz was uniquely suited to that in many ways in the next module, the regional advantage of Santa Cruz. Planning. Let's talk about how Zach and Kendra planned this business out and pulled it off. So, list of assumptions about the business that we went over in the Much Ado About Something talk. Consumers want an artisanal ice cream experience. This does not need proving, and the great thing about a lot of small businesses is that they're based on models that have already been proven elsewhere. And this was the case with artisanal ice cream. There are national case studies to look at. There are trends from the National Restaurant Association. They talk to peers like Zach's sister-in-law. Santa Cruz is an adequately large market. That does need to be proven. They decided to do this with their first shop. They could have gone to the farmer's market and tried that out, but they were going to commit themselves full-time to the thing. They wanted to go a bit bigger than that. They built one store, though, not 2 or 3 or 4, before they had proven the idea out there. I think this is very common for small businesses. You know that the model can work. It's worked many, probably hundreds of thousands, maybe thousands of other places, but you need to make sure that your execution in your market is going to work. And I think that's pretty typical. Customers do not require 31 flavors on a regular basis. A fresh stable of flavors is preferable, one that rotates. This idea needs proving. This was not necessarily something that every other artisanal ice cream business that they were able to look at had done. And their experiment was really the first shop here. Penny can provide artisanal experiences at a cost that they can make a business out of. This they also needed to prove at the first shop, but since their sales numbers were great, this was something they just ended up de facto proving very early on. High-end ice cream is a small luxury that performs well in bad macroeconomic environments. This doesn't need proving because they had access to historical data about this that they were able to access, and the proposition was sort of available to them before they even started. And those are really the key assumptions for the first iteration of the Penny. Let's take a look at the business model canvas that we described in Much Ado About Something. Customer segments. These map to the personas that we described earlier. Epicureans, downtown patrons, students, visitors. Value propositions. A gourmet food experience is really the key proposition, and participation in the sustainable foods community. They are not using channels, no resale. Again, that's because they've identified that the in-store experience, the description of where the product came from, what it's like, almost like the experience you have with a wine sommelier, but not as snooty. That's a key part of the overall product experience. Personal assistance is the customer relationship they have, and again, that's important. They have someone at the counter talking to the customer, one of their own people. Revenue streams. They have retail sales. They also have a catering business because that affords them the ability to provide the same general type of experience. Key resources. They've got the ice cream artisans. They've got this concierge staff that's able to talk about the product. And then they are scaling up the business cost of goods and labor are really their big variable costs. So process infrastructure to make that more efficient is actually a really key resource for them. Key activities are culinary innovation and this participation in the sustainable food-based community organizations that educate about the artisanal food movement, the organic foods movement. This entails events, education, initiatives that they participate in. Key partners, farmers, foragers, artisans. These are people that supply inputs to the penny that they use to make ice cream. Cost structure. They have a pseudo fixed cost of labor in the short term, but that really is variable relatively frequently, especially in a growth environment. Their materials, so cost of goods and labor, and then they have a fixed cost element of plant, which is the store. They began operations in August of 2010, and in 2011 they hit their 2014 sales target. So this quickly went from a business of being a startup in the sense of finding a product market fit to a business that had to figure out how to scale and apply a successful recipe astutely for growth. And that meant managing cost of goods, managing labor, identifying sites. On financing, they did friends and family, and they were able to get a small business loan from Lighthouse Bank here in Santa Cruz. And on earnings, they were break even in 2010, and that was an interesting feature of the business because Zach and Kendra were themselves able to do most of the work. So the minimum efficient scale for the business was pretty low. It's a little different than most high-tech businesses. And they had 16 months to reasonable visibility. Visibility is important because that means you can bank the business. You have an idea about how it's going to perform economically. So if you want a model, there's one on /FinPlan. It'll be up by 8/22. That's on alexandercowan.com. So let's go through this iterative management idea with the penny. So they had the idea that they wanted to participate in the artisanal food movement, and their thing was ice cream. A storefront business was that a storefront business in Santa Cruz had an adequately large market and was a scalable proposition was their key hypothesis. The store was the prototype in the experiment. Operating results of the store proved the proposition, and rather than revising, they're persevering, scaling up. They've opened a store on Beach Street, and they're opening another store on 41st Avenue in Capitola, California. Organization. So the great thing about the penny was that Zach and Kendra themselves were able to do both the customer development and the feasibility. When they started scaling, they started to add and expand to their team, but that's okay because that was paired with revenue. Development. While Penny didn't use Agile, they implicitly applied a lot of the concepts. And one important thing, particularly if you're a small business owner and you're not in a high tech, that's important to know about Agile is while there's lots of orthodoxy and technique that's quite useful where it's appropriate, the Agile idea, the Agile Manifesto, which was published in 2001, is actually only 68 words, and it essentially said, we value individual interactions over processes and tools, working software or product over comprehensive documentation, specs, things like that. We value collaboration over contract negotiation, and we value responding to change over following a plan. And so the ideas about Agile, the core of it, are actually extremely easy to grasp, and I think very widely applicable. It's funny, Zach from the Penny actually recently sent me one of many articles out there about applying Agile to non-tech businesses. So in terms of development, the Penny has really 4 key core processes that they execute. Community development, this includes anything they do that under the traditional rubric of marketing. Product development, that's the ice cream, the other products they sell. Store development, and process engineering. On the first iteration, getting the first store in downtown Santa Cruz up and running, they developed the personas. From those, they created stories, and they did their initial community outreach to explain who the Penny was and what it was about. On product development, they worked on their ice cream base. One interesting thing about the Penny is that they build their own ice cream base, which is unusual for an artisanal ice cream business. Most purchase a base from elsewhere. And they started to work on their flavor portfolio. On store development, their ideas about their customers drove the store design, and that in turn drove the site build, the build out of the actual store. And if you've ever seen it or you want to look at a picture of it online, it's very unique. It showcases the production process because their personas, especially their early personas, are interested in what the food's all about. You can see into the production facility, and it has a very distinctive look and feel. And on process engineering, they did their early development of the processes. The second iteration was about perfecting the product, continuing this initial outreach to the community to explain what artisanal ice cream was about, why it was interesting and good, entice people to try it out because they know that that's the key thing. People like it when they try it. And vigorous validation of the personas and stories that they created to help them think about their customers. Zach, the co-founder, probably knew 600 to 800 people by sight. He spent almost all his time initially behind the counter talking to customers, understanding where they came from, why they were there, how they liked the product. The third iteration was about scale, hiring people, delegating operations to managers, and perfecting the process engineering so that they could scale the business. Fourth iteration, they expanded to the picnic basket, which is on Beach Street in Santa Cruz near the wharf. And in the fifth iteration, right now, that's August 2012, they're broadening their outreach again, and they're opening up a new store on 41st in Capitola, California. Thanks. I hope you enjoyed this. I'm at Cowan SF on Twitter, and my blog is alexandercowan.com/blog. Next module, we're going to talk about the regional advantage of Santa Cruz, how the unique properties of the community enabled this business.